The brain is part of your body's central nervous system and is the most complicated part of your body. It has the ability to send and receive an enormous amount of information. This video will be specifically focusing on the cerebral cortex, an area of the brain responsible for information processing. This was created and narrated by Brianna Bruce for my PS 263 biopsychology class at Wilfrid Laurier University. So let's begin. The brain is divided into three divisions, which are the hindbrain, otherwise known as the rhombencephalon, the midbrain, known as the mesencephalon, and the forebrain, which is also known as the prosencephalon. Within the forebrain, there are two subdivisions called the diencephalon, which hosts the thalamus and hypothalamus, and the telencephalon, hosting the hippocampus, basal ganglia, and most importantly, it hosts the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is the outermost portion of the brain composed of layers of cells. I like to think of it as a shell that surrounds the forebrain, similar to the shell around a turtle's back. The cerebral cortex consists of ridges called gyri that create grooves called sulci. The folds in the brain add to its surface area and therefore increase the quantity of information that can be processed. Simply put, the gyri and sulci together are the wrinkly parts of the outer portion of the brain. Over time, the cerebral cortex undergoes a process called corticalization, or the wrinkling of the cortex. This is due to the large amounts of knowledge that we accumulate over time. So basically, the more wrinkly your brain is, the more smarter and intelligent you are. The cerebral cortex is involved in several functions of the body, but it's most importantly known for being responsible for thinking and processing information from the five senses. It's also responsible for higher thought processes, including speech and decision-making, as well as the initiation of movement. The cerebral cortex is separated into four different lobes. They're called the occipital lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the frontal lobe. This picture shows you where the four lobes are located within the brain. The frontal lobe is the frontmost area of the brain, hence the term frontal. The occipital lobe occupies the portion of the brain that's furthest to the back of the head, and the temporal and parietal lobes sit in the middle, connecting the frontal and occipital together. The parietal lobe sits above the temporal lobe. I find it easy to remember where the temporal lobe is because it's the closest lobe to your temples. The frontal lobe's main responsibility is for carrying out higher mental processes such as thinking, decision-making, reasoning, and planning. So you can thank your frontal lobe for the amazing job you're going to do on your test, as this area of the brain is crucial in higher order thinking. The frontal lobe is specifically important for the planning of movement as it hosts the primary motor cortex, responsible for controlling the execution of voluntary movement, the premotor cortex, which focuses on the thought involved in the planning of movements, as well as the supplementary motor area, also contributing to movement. The parietal lobe is involved in the receiving and processing of sensory information. For example, it monitors all the information about eye, head, and body positions, and it passes it on to the brain areas that control movement. The parietal lobe is also essential for processing touch sensations such as pain and temperature. This is found within the somatosensory cortex. Taste is also processed here within the gustatory cortex. The temporal lobe receives sensory information such as sounds and speech from the ears, and because of this, we also interpret language within this lobe as well. Another sense that is controlled through the temporal lobe is smell, which is processed through the olfactory cortex. The occipital lobe is the main area responsible for processing visual information as it hosts the primary visual cortex. Damage to this area of the brain can cause blindness. However, it's important to note that the visual information is sent to the parietal lobes and temporal lobes for further processing, so it's not the only lobe that deals with our visual information. For example, the temporal lobe contributes to complex aspects of vision, including the recognition of faces. And that's it for this video. I hope you learned a little bit more about the cerebral cortex.